Alright, David Harry here, and I do not even know where to start with this SSD that was sent to me from Lexar, which is their 2TB ES4, which is an external 10 gigabits per second USB-C SSD. Now, the reason why I'm saying I don't know where to start, it's dead simple. Oh, and by the way, if you are interested or if you're looking for a 10 gigabits per second external USB-C SSD, you have to watch all of this video. So where I've been struggling with this SSD is to understand why or how it is so good. Now, I want to use the word, it's just magic. Do you know what I mean? But I don't think that quite covers it. But the thing is, right, let me just quickly explain what goes on with this SSD in my tests. So I hit a maximum speed, which you will expect to see out of every SSD, and that's usually down to SLC cache. But then what happens is that speed will drop down, and some SSDs will go really low once they start writing to their TLC NAND. Right, this SSD does not drop its speed from its highest speed right the way through the entirety of the capacity of the SSD. Now, to show you this, what I've done is to use my my Acasis 8TB RAID 0 set here in order to send the data in and out of the SSD. Now, it's arguable that I didn't need to use the RAID in order to do this test, because with the maximum speed of this being easily capable of being achieved from my MacBook, I could have just done it with that. However, and this is super important, I used 1.9 terabytes worth of data. So obviously I had to use my RAID for that, because my Mac simply could not have handled that amount of data. So to be super clear, I put 1.9 terabytes worth of data on the write speed test to this SSD, and it hits its maximum speed straight away, which is super fast. I'm not going to tell you what it is right now because I want you to watch the results. But that super high speed that it hits for a 10 gigabits per second SSD is maintained right the way through the whole 1.9 terabytes worth of data being written. And as far as I'm concerned, I think, yes, I'm just going to have to say magic, okay? It's a magic SSD. Anyway, with all that said, yeah, just watch through this and just take away whatever it is that you can take away from it. And if you can work out why it's so good, please tell me. Anyway, what I will do is come back at the end of the video just to do a bit of a short summary and stuff. But first, a quick word about this video sponsor, who is Acasis. Acasis are the market leader when it comes to Thunderbolt peripherals for your Apple Silicon Mac. From Thunderbolt 4 and Thunderbolt 5 SSD enclosures through to Thunderbolt hubs and docking systems. With industry-leading blazing fast speeds, Acasis has you covered. To find out more about the entire Acasis product lineup, check out the links in the video description below, and don't forget to use my 15% promo code for a 15% discount off anything you buy from the Acasis website. Okay, so I'm onto the desktop for my MacBook here, and as we can see, there is the SSD. I've just got this titled as Lexar ES4 2TB. However, what I'm going to do first of all is to format or erase the disk, and in doing so, as you will see here, it says Lexar ES4 Media, so that is the SSD. Now I'm just going to tap on erase here. I'm going to give it the exact same name. I'm going to use APFS and GUID. Let me just erase this. Now this should happen fairly quickly. If you just give us a few seconds here, and there we go, done. And I will just exit disk utility. Now let me just quickly show you the info for the SSD. As we can see here, available 2.05 terabytes. So basically this is an empty SSD. Okay, now what I'm going to do first of all is just to run a couple of synthetic disk speed tests to give us an idea of what these are saying. So first off is the Blackmagic disk speed test. So what I'm going to do here is just to select a target, which is the Lexar there. Let me open that and let me start this. Now we are going to see some really good numbers here anyways. However, this is only telling us part of the story. And honestly, once I show you the real world disk speed test here, you will be absolutely blown away. But as we can see there, we're registering over 900 megabytes per second for the read and the write. Now I'm just going to launch into the amorphous disk mark speed test here. Again, let me just go and select the Lexar. Let me just choose that and then let me click all here. Now, of course, this is going to take a little bit of time. So what I'm going to do is once it starts, which it has done now, I'm just going to speed up through this until we get to the end. Okay, so this speed test is now completed. Now, as we can see here, these numbers do look really good. However, it's the top line here that we're more interested in because, of course, what we're going to be using an SSD like this for is for storing files externally. So it's this top line sequential number here, or both of these sequential numbers, that are the most important. And these are very impressive for a 10 gigabits per second SSD. However, these two synthetic tests have only shown as part of the story here, because neither of these two tests actually tell us how long this particular SSD sustains its maximum data rate for when doing a heavy write load. So what I am going to do now is to connect up my RAID 0 drive set, which will not only allow me to transfer data at the fastest possible speeds in and out of this ES4 2TB, but also I can then transfer a huge amount of data in one go. So give me a second while I connect up my RAID. Okay, so I have now got my Acasis 8TB RAID 0 drive set connected. Now what I'm going to do first of all is to just test that with the Blackmagic disk speed test. So let me just go and select the Acasis RAID. I'll open that and start the test. Now this is just to show you how fast this RAID is, and as you can see here, both the read and the write are over 9,000 megabytes per second. So what this clearly is indicating is that the RAID is definitely well capable of sending the data in and out of the ES4 as fast as the ES4 can possibly read and write the data. So basically we will not bottleneck anything here. And also there's another point of using this RAID, and the reason why is because the test folder that I'm going to use is 1.9 terabytes in size, and of course my Mac has only got a 1 terabyte SSD, so I couldn't possibly have stored this folder on the Mac itself. Now if I just quickly show you the info for the actual folder, as we can see here, 1,900,000 megabytes in size that folder is, and it's got 916 items in it. So if I just quickly go into the folder, there's a bunch of subfolders with loads of video and picture files, and in the root here there's a bunch of picture files. In fact, there's some audio, picture and video files amongst all of these folders. So I would say that these are typical of the types of things that most people would be storing on their external SSDs. And of course the massive thing here is that this is a massive folder that we're about to transfer. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to just quickly lay out the screen a little bit easier so we can see what's going on. Okay, so I've just set everything up here so that things are a little bit easier to see as to what's going on. So at the top here, there's the RAID. On the bottom, there is the Lexar. And then in the middle here, I've actually got activity monitor so we can keep an eye on what's going on. Then I've got a stopwatch here to time what's going on. So what I'm going to do first of all is the write speed test with the Lexar. So what I'm going to do is to grab this folder and drop it onto the Lexar and then hit start. Now I'll explain a few more things once I do this. So drop, start. Okay, so what I'm doing here obviously is to test the write speed, or basically it's not even so much the speed per se, it's the amount of high data rate that we're going to get here. So this is the write element of the test, and what we can quite clearly see here with activity monitor is that this written or the data written number here is going to be within 900 megabytes per second up to a gigabyte per second. Now, I've got to explain something here, and this is the whole point of this video. What happens is when you start transferring data to any SSD, the first thing that's going to happen is that it will use its SLC cache in order to basically cache the data. And what's going to happen with that? That's where you will see the fastest speed of the SSD. But then what happens is that once that SLC cache has been depleted, the data is then written to the TLC NAND, and in that instance we normally see quite a substantial drop in the bit rate, and indeed a lot of NVMe SSDs that are on the cheaper end of the scale, they can drop down to less than 100 megabytes per second once they start writing to their TLC NAND. However, look at this now. This drive has already done like 90 odd gigabytes of data, and it has not stopped, or it hasn't kind of lowered its fastest write speed at the moment. Now, here's the weird thing. It will not drop this speed right the way through this 1.9 terabytes worth of data, and I will show you this in a minute because I'm going to speed up through this because we can't wait here for 30 minutes to see what's going on. However, another thing to just quickly explain, whilst this is a 2 terabyte SSD, I'm only transferring a 1.9 terabytes per day of data, and I say only 1.0 terabytes like as if that's a smaller number or something. It's not that much smaller than 2 terabytes. Now, the reason for that is that I just didn't want to use up the last 100 gigabytes of the storage, and the reason for that is just simply because sometimes when you start getting to those last few NAND cells on an SSD, weird things can happen. So I just wanted to be super fair with this particular test and just make sure that we didn't overstress that last bit of TLC NAND within inside of the 2 terabyte ES4 here. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is to just speed up through this video until we get to the end of this data dump, and you are going to see the most amazing thing, and that is that this data rate for the write speed won't hardly change at all from what it is doing right now. Okay, so I'm going to come back in here now just before this 1.9 terabytes worth of data is transferred over. And as we can see here, just look at that write speed. It is still over, well, I was going to say it's still over 900 megabytes per second, but it's still hitting a gigabyte per second. So this has basically maintained that speed all the way through this 1.9 terabytes worth of data being written to the Lexar, which is just insane. Now let me just get ready to hit pause here once this data is fully transferred over. So if you just bear with me just for a few more seconds by the looks of it. Hold on, not saying 10 seconds. Okay, it won't be too long now. I'm sorry about this, but give us a moment. Hold on. Okay, so it's done. So that took, say, 32 minutes and 32 seconds. Let me just make a quick note of that. Okay, so the reason why I timed it to see how long it took to write that data is because shortly after I've done the read speed test, I'm going to calculate the real world bit rates by dividing the size of the data written and the data read by the time that it takes to do it, and then that will give us our accurate average read and write speeds then for this entire 1.9 terabytes worth of data being written and read from. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to reset the stopwatch. I'm just going to reformat the RAID, basically just to get rid of that folder out of it. So if you give us a moment here, hold on. Where are we? Erase disk. Let me just erase the disk. Okay, what it is, I've got to erase the disk just so that we don't have any residual files left over when I start transferring the data back. So let me just pull the RAID back into here. Hold on. Sorry about this, I just want to try and get it all neat and ready. Okay, so let me just do this and I'll explain what's going on once again. So I'm going to get that folder, drop it into there and hit start. Okay, so this is now being read from the Lexar and written back to the RAID. So obviously in this instance what we are doing is timing and observing the read speed of the Lexar, and as you can see here, you know, these read speeds are still really impressive, however not quite as impressive as the write speeds. Anyway, so once again what I'm going to do here is to just speed up through this, and you can just keep an eye on what's going on here with the data. The data read is what we should be looking at, not the data written. So the data read here, that's what you should keep an eye on just as it's going through. And then like I say, what I will do at the end, I'll take another timing for this, and then we can work out the proper average of the read speed as well during the dumping of the entire 1.9 terabytes worth of data. Okay, so I'm going to come back in here now and get ready to hit pause on that stopwatch, but interestingly, as we can see here, that read speed is still averaging over 900 megabytes per second, which is awesome. Anyway, this should only take a few more seconds here, so if you just bear with me. What it is, because it's such a long test, it's very hard to gauge just when it's going to stop. So this should be done fairly shortly. It's saying 10 seconds now. I'm just going to have to pad out for a little bit more time whilst this is counting down. And this is nearly done. Give us a second. Oh, hold on. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to call that 34 minutes and 27 seconds. So I'm just going to make a note of that, and then I will calculate the real world bit rates. Okay, so as far as the results are concerned for the real world disk speed test for the Lexar ES4 2 terabyte, with regard to the read speed, which is what I will start off with first, the time taken was 34 minutes and 27 seconds, which equals 2067 seconds. So if we divide the size of the data in megabytes, which was 1,900,000 megabytes by 2067, we get 919, and that is 919 megabytes per second, which is hugely impressive, although we would expect to have the read speed sustained for any SSD anyway. However, when it comes to the write speed test, that took 32 minutes and 30 seconds, which is 1,950 seconds. So if we once again divide 1,900,000 by the time taken, which is 1,950, that gives us a result of 974, which is 974 megabytes per second. And you have to remember that that particular speed was maintained all the way through the transferring of 1.9 terabytes worth of data written. So as far as an end summary is concerned, the first thing I'm going to have to do is to put my hands up and say, I just do not understand how this SSD is so good. Okay, I've never come across an SSD quite like this one before. Even back in the old SATA days, you could get the odd SATA SSD, such as some of the high-end ones by Samsung, which would maintain their speeds. However, what we've just seen there is something that's maintaining, what is it, around 970 megabytes per second for the entirety of that 1.9 terabyte data dump. Now, the thing is, I was going to do a lot more explaining of some stuff at this point in the video to do with SLC cache and, like, you know, TLC NAND and stuff like that. However, I thought to myself, it's only going to make this video way longer than what it already is. So what I've decided to do is to do another video where I show a whole bunch of other SSDs, and I'm going to start talking about things like SLC cache and TLC and stuff like that. And for that video, which is kind of like part 2 of this video almost, although I will be talking about a lot of other enclosures like Thunderbolt 5, Thunderbolt 4, USB 4 and stuff. It's really just to drive home the insanity of how good this SSD is as far as maintaining that maximum write speed for the entirety of, like, you know, the capacity of the SSD. So if you're interested in, like, you know, hearing me blabber on a bit more about like SLC cache and TLC, and also the reason why I'm still like completely like, you know, confounded as to how this SSD is so good, keep an eye on the channel for that particular video when it comes up. However, just to end this video, and I'm not going to do any close-ups because there's loads of people who've done videos about this particular SSD, although none of them have shown anything like the performance that I've just shown to you there, and I think that that's the most important thing when it comes to SSDs. Oh, another thing as well, right the way through that entirety of the data written, the SSD does heat up, but quite clearly it doesn't heat up anywhere near the point where it gets too hot and goes into thermal throttling, because if it did go into thermal throttling, it would not have maintained that super high write speed for the entirety of the 1.9 terabytes of data written. So yeah, as far as temperatures are concerned, absolutely no problem. Anyway, so what we get here is a USB-C to USB short cable, and that is exactly what I used in the test. So I used the supplied USB-C to USB-C cable with it. We also get a USB-A to USB-C cable. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is only a 5 gigabits one. Oh, actually, no, it says on it 10 gigabits. So that's a 10 gigabits cable. Obviously, the C to C cable is 10 gigabits. We also get a little lanyard thing here, or a little strap that we can attach to this case, and I'll explain what the case is in a second. But we also get a little magnetic ring here, which means that you can stick this onto, say, the back of a MacBook or the back of the case for a MacBook or something. I wouldn't really advise putting things like this straight onto like the metalwork of your MacBooks, but if you've got a case on your MacBook, you can put this ring on, and then what happens is this little case here, which we can put the SSD in, is MagSafe, and this can connect to the back of like anything where you put that ring on. Now let me just quickly show you. I'm just going to shove the SSD inside of the case. Now this is like a rubbery silicon type case, and to be perfectly honest, once I start using this SSD on a daily basis, I'm going to leave it in this rubber case, and the reason why is, you know, it's going to give the SSD protection, so how cool's that? But what this is designed for is, let me just show you. Oh, I could have done this better. It's never going to go on with that thing on the back of the iPhone. So, as we can see here, this thing makes the SSD stick to the back of the iPhone, and it's actually, I'm not going to pull my hand away while I'm shaking it just in case it does drop, but it's quite strong, or it's at least strong enough for me to do this. So basically you can turn this SSD into something that can be used with your iPhones for an external MagSafe compatible SSD. Now on that point as well, at some point I am going to do a video demonstration with some really high bandwidth video on this recorded from the iPhone, and then also a bunch of other video stuff on it, and show you just how good that this SSD is for editing video off right. I've been using this, or I've done some tests with some 4K 60 ProRes 422 HQ files, which I recorded from my Atomos Ninja, and then also the highest possible bit rates off the iPhone 17 Pro Max here, which is, I think I tested 4K 60 FPS open gate. So not only will it obviously record, because don't forget, the maximum bit rate sustained on this thing is twice as fast as anything that you can record on the iPhones. So not only can you record for like 2 terabytes with the iPhone, it is an absolutely fantastic SSD for editing from, and also for general data storage for your Macs as well. Anyway, yeah, I think I'll have to leave it at that. Otherwise, I'm just going to carry on talking and talking. The bottom line here is dead simple. This SSD is absolutely a no-brainer for anybody who's on Apple Silicon Mac and they just want to have a 10 gigabits per second USB-C SSD. Now, don't forget, you can obviously go way faster than this SSD with the likes of Thunderbolt 4, USB 4, Thunderbolt 5 and stuff. But, you know, a lot of people out there simply don't need those speeds. However, if you were to invest in one of these, I absolutely guarantee you that you will have not just zero problems, but you will be so happy that you've bought this SSD. This SSD, seriously, and I know I'm gushing and I'm not shutting my mouth, which is what I should have done 10 minutes ago. But this SSD, seriously, is just insane value for money when you consider how much it costs, like, you know, per gigabyte, because whereas you could build yourself an external 2 terabyte like USB-C SSD 10 gigabits per second one, by the time you've bought, like, you know, your enclosure and then bought the NVMe SSD to go in it to make a 2 terabyte one, this one probably ends up being cheaper and is also going to be faster, because, to be super clear, although I've built, like, or put together 10 gigabits per second SSDs before, every single one of them suffers from that SLC cache limit dropping and then goes to a TLC speed, some of which drop down below 100 megabytes per second. So honestly, this is just mad. I'm going to shut up. I don't know when to stop. Anyway, so keep an eye out for the other videos. There'll be a link to this in the video description and stuff. And thank you very much to Lexar for sending me it. I'm David Harry. Thank you very much for watching this video. Take care and goodbye now.